What famous person did horrible things that people largely forgot about?
Remember when a 16-year-old girl overdosed in Don Henley's house? He pled guilty to minor misdemeanor charges and then wrote a song about how mean the media was to him. Because I feel like almost no one does.
Boy George abducted and tortured a man in 2007.
Soulja Boy beat a pregnant woman into having a miscarriage.
Floyd Mayweather beat the out of his former girlfriend, and got away with it because the judge allowed him to train for a fight he was headlining.
Robert H. Richards I.V. Richards, who's the heir to the DuPont family's estimated $14 billion, was arrested in 2009 for repeatedly sexually assaulting his 3-year-old daughter. The billionaire offered to take a polygraph test to clear his name, but he failed the exam and eventually confessed to should have received a sentence of potentially 30 years in prison. But his lawyers were able to change the charge to 4th degree, and he was given 8 years in prison. However, the court believed he wouldn't fare well in prison, so his sentence was suspended and he was freed on probation.
Copied from article about the Peter, Paul and Mary Singer's assault on a 14-year-old girl. Peter Yarrow's 1981 pardon from President Jimmy Carter for taking indecent liberties with a child should have been a much bigger deal, but it was quickly overshadowed by the freeing of the American hostages in Iran just hours later. But now, decades later, a new Washington Post piece revisits the controversial pardon of the folk singer, of Peter, Paul and Mary fame, and reveals that Yarrow may have preyed upon other underage girls.
Kurt Johnson, the billionaire whose family owned the household products company, S.C. Johnson, was arrested in March 2011 for molestation. Faced with a potential 40-year sentence for repeatedly assaulting his teenage stepdaughter, the businessman, who was worth an estimated $1 billion in 2019, only received 3 months in prison and a fine of the short prison term, and the fine that hardly made a dent in his fortune. Johnson also didn't have to register as a offender.
Jack Nicholson beat a that he hired to the point of irreversible brain damage.
Cheryl Cole beat the living daylights out of a toilet attendant.
Vince Neil only got 30 days and he killed somebody.
Jared Leto. Bro really and sexually assaulted underage girls, and so much people act like he's done nothing wrong. Not even any deal or movie drops. He's still consistently hired all around, and it's the dumbest in the world.
Philip Burke, film industry executive, journalist, and film critic, sexually assaulted Brendan Fraser, and his defense was, it was in jest not intent, which then he got off for it. Had any of us used that defense, we would have been buried under the jail.
Alexander Graham Bell, yes, the telephone guy, campaigned for and eventually helped to outlaw sign language in both deaf and hearing, hoping to integrate schools with both deaf and hearing students. Instead, he ended up depriving deaf students who were not able to hear of language. The last of these laws banning sign in the US was finally repealed in 1979. Canada didn't finish ridding themselves of these laws until 2010.
Salvador Dali * found a thrill in torturing and killing living things, both animals and humans. He tried to his sister and one of his lovers. He tortured and killed animals. George Orwell wrote a scathing condemnation of our willingness to overlook what a horrible sociopath he was just so that he might paint us another pretty picture. A summary. Original article.
John Travolta sexually assaulted several young men, and has seemingly faced no repercussions from this.
Don King stomped an employee to death, after pistol whipping him, over $600 that he claimed the man owed him in the form of a gambling, probably with no small amount of lobbying on his part. The Cleveland City Council considered renaming the same street where it happened after him. No, not after the victim, Sam Garrett, but after the man who, again, stomped him, to who was convicted, although he unfortunately only served just shy of 4 years, in which he was and is a free man, while Sam Garrett, obviously, is still quite only in America. But man, there are too many stories like this. And seemingly more with each passing day. It would be nice to have a functioning justice system. Worthless pieces of like Don King will eventually go the way of all flesh, whether they go on to burn in for eternity or not, but there should be some accounting asterisk in this life, as well.
At this point, asking which famous person didn't do horrible things is probably a shorter list.
The Marcos family in the Philippines.
They're back in power after cleverly gaming the May 2022 presidential elections. They systemically looted the country for 2 decades and initiated a policy of exporting Filipinos to other countries as Philippines never recovered.
Former NHL player Craig McTavish killed a woman while driving went to jail for a year and missed playing for 1 season. Got his name on 4 Stanley Cups afterwards and is currently an assistant coach for the St. Louis current Premier of Saskatchewan Province in Canada Scott Moe. Caught driving twice as a young man. Later caused an accident in which someone was killed, but the police could not prove DUI that time. Got a ticket for dangerous driving. One more I almost forgot. Renowned beatnik author William Burroughs killed his common-law wife. Supposedly they were playing a William Tell game, only he missed the target.
Travis Scott essentially leaving his manager for dead in the studio. His loyal ex-manager who suffered from seizures, had won while Travis was with him. Travis abandoned him while it was happening and went home, then texted him firing him a day later saying, "I can't have a manager who's shaking on the ground," and the lack of empathy continued with Astro World.
CeeLo Green. In 2012 he slipped a woman an ecstasy pill without her knowledge and her while she was unconscious. She woke up in his bed with no memory of what happened. His charges were eventually lowered to a felony of supplying ecstasy. In response to backlash, he tweeted, "People who have really been remember, and, if someone is passed out they're not even with you consciously." So with implies because with an unconscious person isn't it's, thanks to those of you who pointed out my wording.
The lobotomy of Rosemary Kennedy. I know it's not really a single celebrity, but I don't ever see it talked about. Outrage.
Travis Scott and his Astroworld event that killed multiple people while he told everyone to put their middle fingers up to the ambulance that was trying to save the dying people.
Didn't Caitlyn Jenner hit and someone with her car?
Orahorn the Fasadin na Ayudia in 2010. A 17-year-old girl named Orahorn the Fasadin na Ayudia was driving one of her father's cars without a proper driver's license. She was texting and driving, and slammed into a passenger van that was carrying 14 people. She killed 9 of the passengers, and seriously injured the rest, causing a massive pile-up on the highway. After the accident, she seemed to be unfazed, and unhurt. She got out of the car, plopped her purse on the ground, and continued texting. Someone took a photo of her in that moment, and once it was passed around in the press, the public was understandably wealthy parents paid for a lawyer, of course, and they somehow brought the sentence of 3 years in jail for driving without a license down to just a few months of community service. Even then, she was so spoiled she often refused to show up to her duties volunteering at a hospital, and complained the entire time.
Tom Cruise, Scientologist, apparently once his teenage niece kissed a boy at a party at the family house. He expelled her from the family for 2 years and forced her to live with Scientologist friends of his. She had to write a huge essay for him detailing all she had done to atone for her sins. I watched an ex-Scientology guy talk about it on the YouTubes.
Coco Chanel.
Michael Irvin, NFL Hall of Famer, stabbed a teammate in the neck with scissors at a barbershop, because he was senior and wanted his haircut done first. I think it was pretty close to a part of his teammate's neck that would have been a fatal wound. I love the NFL and hadn't heard about it until this past year. He never faced any jail. Wow, I'm never early enough to a thread to get a ton of upvotes like this. I'm not sure if this below YT video is where I first heard the story, but I think it may have been, so I've linked it for anybody curious in the story. It's a far more detailed account of the stabbing than I gave. I was just going off the memory of whatever video I watched long.
Ted Kennedy left a young woman to drown in his car. No consequences.
Jared Leto needs to be exposed. He's a cult leader and how is he still working?
Tom Cruise helped the Church of Scientology when they caused the wrongful death of one of their members, Lisa McPherson. Cruise was used to woo politicians in Florida just as the church was being indicted for the abuse committed against Lisa, and later the charges were dropped.
Caitlyn Jenner killed a and then one woman of the same year. Still cracks me up.
Steven Tyler had a relationship with a 16-year-old girl when he was 25. He convinced the parents to sign over legal guardianship to him so that he could take her on tour with him across state lines without being arrested. He eventually pressured her into aborting his son when she was 17 years old. You can read about it in this from Rolling Stone.
Paul Walker has entered the chat, so has his significantly younger girlfriend. He was 33 and she was 15 if I recall, feel free to look it up.
Steve sociopath Jobs. He berated his daughter for being born to his mistress, refused to install heating in her bedroom, reiterated she isn't getting a penny of his $400 million fortune, then told her she smelled like a toilet on his hope she's an avid Samsung consumer.